Good afternoon, class. We're going to start working forward in chapter 4 today. And before we do, we're going to go back and review a little of what we talked about in chapter 3, or what hopefully we all learned in chapter 3. And when they were talking about chapter 3, they talking about executives especially, I guess, evaluating the environment. And the executives and senior management team as a whole should be concerned about customers, rivals, social trends, political entities, and there are additional conditions and factors that can come into play from time to time. And from that perspective, the authors moved into evaluating kind of the general environment versus evaluating the industry specific environment, or more importantly, the competitive environment. And why would your environment ever matter? And it's because the environment generates your factors of production. It's, the source of opportunities and threats, and it shapes strategic decisions. And you'll see as we move on forward in the book, we'll get a little more into detail into, I think maybe it's in this chapter, we get into SWOT analysis where you're looking at strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. So something that's used a lot in the industry to maintain that, either however you want to phrase it, competitive or comparative advantage. And as far as an analytical approach, we went through PESTEL, and it's PESTEL. Remember, it was political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. And then from there, we went into Michael Porter's, I guess you'd call it his 5-factor analysis, or his concept of managing or evaluating the environment. And so on Michael Porter, now you're starting to get in. So PESTEL is more on the general environment, and Michael Porter, we're starting to get into that competitive environment, talking about rivalry among competitors, potential new entrants, threats of substitutes, power of suppliers, and power of buyers. And remember, on the suppliers and the buyer side of it, think about the profit maximization formula that you learned in microeconomics. Profit maximization from an accounting perspective is revenue minus cost. And so the impact of your suppliers are going to drive the cost component. The impact of your buyers are going to drive the revenue component. So from a corporation's perspective, or from a profit maximizing entity's perspective, you want to maximize revenue, minimize cost. At that point, you're going to get the greatest level of profit. And then the author spent just a few minutes talking about the importance of mapping strategic groups. And from chapter 3, now we're going to slide into chapter 4, and we're going to talk about managing company resources. I want to make sure everybody understands that when we're talking about, at least in this chapter, talking about managing company resources, not so much managing company resources, let's say from a capital stock perspective. And remember, we'll go back to your micro classes, factors of production, labor, capital stock, natural resources, which is, usually land is the natural resource most people focus on. And then sitting out here, kind of off to the side, you've got technology. And again, it's a technology of the process. It's not the number of laptops you have, or the number of iPads are walking around the building, or necessarily the number of iPhones. From an economist's perspective, when you talk about technology, they're talking about the technology of the production function, the knowledge that's within that organization that helps maximize the production function. In other words, maximize that black box. Inputs coming in, spins through the black box, outputs going out the other end. And that's what economists tend to focus on when they're talking about technology. It's the technology and the knowledge of the production process. And then last, you've got your entrepreneurs sitting out here, and they're trying to either bring new product to market, trying to improve the current product, trying to improve the production process. And the end result for an entrepreneur is more profit. So when we talk about now in chapter 4, when we're going to talk about managing company resources, more along the lines of thinking about strategic leadership, competitive advantage, organizational culture, and they launch into the theory that I think a lot of companies may not take advantage of when they're talking about managing company resources, and it's the resource-based theory. And the definition they provide in the book, it's organizations owning strategic resources have significant competitive advantage over organizations that do not. And they give you 4 characteristics of these resources. It's valuable, it's rare, it's difficult to imitate, and they're non-substitutable. And they actually give you if you bought the text or you're reading along with the text as we go through the class, they do a pretty good job. And they use Southwest a lot in this chapter. And they go through, and there's a figure 4.1 in the text. It does a pretty good job relating to Southwest and relating about, how they have valuable and rare and difficult to imitate and non-substitutable. And always remember, and I talk kind of ad nauseum, from this perspective, why do firms produce goods and services? They produce it for one reason only, and that's to make profits. I don't care what they tell you, it's always being driven on profits. Remember, 3 pillars of economic thought: opportunity cost, self-interest. Self-interest is where you get into the profit maximization of organizations. And then finally, you're making decisions at the margin, or talking about the marginal decision room. And then they jump in, and the authors talk about the 4 characteristics of strategic resources, and they go back through resource-based theory. And the definition now that we're going to work with is a theory that contends that the possession of strategic resources can provide an organization with competitive advantages over its rivals. It can help organizations not only enjoy strong profits, but will help organizations to maintain those strong profits over the long run. And we're going to go, and so they take you through these 4 characteristics of strategic resources. And again, academics, writing textbooks, I actually like the resource-based theory concept from this perspective. But as an economist, I'm always in the back of my mind thinking, okay, this is great on how you manage your strategic resources, but you've also got to think about how you're going to manage those factors of production. Because to me, I'm constantly thinking about the profit function, revenue minus cost. But when it comes to strategic resources, the first one that comes up is valuable. And the definition they give you in the text is resources that help a company create strategies that capitalize on opportunities and ward off threats. Valuable. Organizational culture that drives employees to do their best. And that's where you have, especially C-suite individuals, most notably CEO, president, whoever the top dog is in the company. They're trying to inspire, they're trying to motivate, they're trying to assure not only the board of directors, but to assure, especially if it's a publicly traded company, assure the stockholders that the company is performing at a level that is far exceeding what everybody thought they could do, that employees are going out of their way to produce, going out of their way to give the best effort when it comes to producing goods and services. Second one they talk about is rare. Resources are unique when contracted with resources of competitors. If you've had some leadership classes, they talk about when it's a culture that has a significant competitive advantage over the competitors. You're typically talking about embraces having fun, working together, maybe profit sharing, but everybody working together to not only maximize the mission and the vision and the goals that the company set up, but they're trying to maximize that profit. They're trying to eliminate strikes, work through layoffs. Poor morale is uncommon. So you typically don't see strikes. You typically don't see layoffs. And again, you don't have that poor morale issue. The third one is difficult to imitate. Resources that cannot be easily duplicated by competitors and are often protected by various legal means, including trademarks, patents, and copyrights. And this is where we're going to get into things like intellectual properties, and we'll get into that a little later in this chapter. It's hard to copy. It evolves over time, reflects unique aspects of the company. I think back to my time in Buffalo working at Blue Cross Blue Shield. Perfect example. Blue Cross Blue Shield had a union shop. Buffalo heavily blue collar, heavily unionized. And one of the aspects with Blue Cross and Blue Shield that was difficult to imitate is the other health plans, other regional health plans, other national health plans didn't want a union shop. Union shops are extremely difficult, at least from my experience and perspective, extremely difficult to manage. In most instances, it's difficult to maximize productivity and efficiency because of the union shop rules and the parameters negotiated in that collective bargaining unit or collective bargaining agreement that covers the collective bargaining unit in their workday. But one of the advantages is, as difficult as it was to manage within that union shop mentality, and I had part of the union reported to me doing the coordination of benefits, other party liability, workers' comp, motor vehicle accidents. And I had about, 50 some union employees out of my team was about 100 individuals, and about 50 of them were union shop employees, and extremely difficult. You're talking about a bunch of punches a clock and watches a clock. The majority of them worked from 7:15, and they walked out the door at 3:30. And they weren't going to come on a minute before 7:15, and they would actually stop work and start collecting their things and putting stuff away between 3 and 3:15, and because when it hit 3:30, it was like kind of like the Kentucky Derby when that bell rings and all the horses shoot out at once. That's the way the union shop did. At 3:30, man, they were out that door. It was just like a sprint. Everybody running to their cars because they wanted to get out of that parking structure and get home. So you didn't get any extra benefit out of that union shop unless you were actually willing to pay them overtime. But the key thing and the reason I think that Blue Cross kept them around was because there were so many of the employer groups that we sold business to that had union shops that I think it was actually an advantage when it came to selling goods and services, which in our case was healthcare goods and services, to the employer group. So extremely difficult to manage, but it kind of falls under that difficult to imitate because the other health plans in the area were not willing to bring on a union shop. And then you've got non-substitutable. Resources that exist when competitors cannot find alternative ways to gain the benefits that a resource provides. And then they talk about if a company embraces the 4 qualities, they have sustained competitive advantage, and again, a competitive advantage that will endure over time. If one or more of the qualities are missing, it may lead to short-run success, but long-run success is difficult. And that as the way they kind of bring this resource-based theory, at least this part of it together, as they say, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's what resource theory is based on. But to kind of backtrack a little, when we're talking about substitutable, think of Southwest. You can't find another airline that operates like Southwest. They fly a lot of routes to cities that may not have other options or very limited options of airport transportation or airline transportation. A lot of the segments, they are segments, and they hop from one city to the next. Used to, they were extremely price competitive, and now maybe not so much, but I still get all these, and I'm a member of this, frequent flyers with Southwest, and I get emails. I got one the other day, fly one way for $29, which unfortunately wasn't any of the places I wanted to go, but still $29 one way. So talking about 29 and talking about $58 round trip, and that's tax included. So pretty cheap way to fly. But their customer service is great. They can fill an airplane faster than any other airline around. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's you get on that plane, you put your behind in that seat, and allow the next person to find their seat. And it's a fun flight. Most of their stewardess, or they don't call them stewardess, I guess they call them flight attendants now, are young. Usually they can sing and they can kind of dance and they can tell a few jokes, and they actually try to make flying fun, even though flying has gotten to be such a drag. It's kind of a breath of fresh air with an outfit like Southwest. And it's non-substitutable because most airlines can't provide that type service. Think about the customer service that you get from Nordstrom, huge retail store. Nordstrom, you buy something, doesn't fit, doesn't suit, something tears up, take it back. They will take it back, no questions asked. They don't want to know why it doesn't work. They don't really care. They just say, hey, we'll take it back. They take it back. They credit your, put the credit back on your credit card, and everything's good to go. They're focused, Southwest, Nordstrom, Costco, they're focused on customer service. They're focused on, price advantages. They have a definite loyalty, brand image, and it's non-substitutable, and that's what drives outfits or drives companies like, again, Nordstrom, Southwest, Costco. Costco's just like Nordstrom. You buy something, you take it home, you bring it back. Hey, no questions asked. Resource-based theory, sometimes it's extremely confusing to some individuals studying it because they use the term resources. It's not, your automobile. It's not, the money you've got in the bank. It's not, especially on an individual level, it's not the house you live in. I mean, those are resources. If you think about companies, it's the building they have. It's the technology infrastructure. Maybe it's inventory they have on hand. The resource-based theory is talking about more along the lines of culture and the ability to maintain that competitive advantage. Resource-based theory concentrates on strategic resources, ability to bundle and turn common resources into strategic resources. And that's one thing, if you look at the Southwest and the Nordstrom and the Costco's of the world, they may not have what would appear to be direct strategic resources, but they start combining some of their common resources, and before you know it, they've turned common resources, bundled them together, and now they do have strategic resources. And at this point, we're going to stop for a few minutes, and when we come back, we're going to talk about kind of moving from the resource idea into the capability type space. Talk to everybody in a few minutes.